to everyone. Good to be here this morning. I don't remember how many days ago it was. Tabitha and I were visiting with Chris and George at their house, and we had a good conversation. And towards the end, Chris said, "Hey, it's coming up on the 50th year of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which happened on November 10th." And I said, "Oh yeah, that's wow, okay." And I just kind of did a cursory comment. I didn't, obviously, it's kind of in the culture. We've heard the name of it and kind of know what that's about, but I wasn't super familiar with it. And I felt bad because I think Chris knows a lot about it and she wanted to talk about it, and I didn't have anything to offer there. But I went home that day. I said, I need to know what this is about. I need to learn about it, you know? And so I did. And it just so happens that there's a guy named John Bacon. I think the middle initial is U, but he just came out with a book, awesome book called The Gales of November, which I haven't read, but I watched him give interviews based on his book, some videos on YouTube. And this guy's incredible, and he has like inside access to the family members that they don't normally just give to anyone, but they trusted him through a mutual friend, and he gets these stories of the family members and the 29 crew members on the ship that no one else has. It's really powerful, the information that he has, and of course talking about life on the sea or the lakes, as it were, back then, and that sort of stuff. But anyways, so I was getting into that, and I don't know if it's just because of where I went to elementary school. Like, my kids know what the Edmund Fitzgerald is, but they go to elementary school in Michigan. I went to elementary school somewhere else, so maybe that's why I didn't learn about it as much or something, but they knew all the stuff that I'm going to say right now that I thought was awesome. I'd never heard it before, but anyways, one of the most touching parts of the story, obviously there's a bunch of mystery and intrigue about it, and beautiful, wonderful stories. But after, there was the Fitzgerald going across the Superior that day, and about an hour behind them, or 15 miles, was a different ship called the Arthur M. Anderson, and that was captained by Jesse Cooper. And by the time the Fitzgerald had lost all of its radar, and the lighthouse had gone out on Whitefish Point, and they had no way of navigating this final stretch, what would have been the last hour, like about 15 miles. Before that, it was the Anderson and Captain Cooper that was helping Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald navigate through the darkness in this massive storm. And then eventually, obviously, that last powerful time, McSorley, the last thing he ever said to anyone was, "We're holding our own," He said that to Cooper on the ship behind. But so Cooper was trying to keep tabs on and help the Fitzgerald make it through, and obviously they lost contact, and then no one ever saw or heard from them again. And Captain Cooper goes through in this raging storm and finds out that the Fitzgerald never came into port and everything, and he's there, and they made it through the storm, the same storm that the Fitzgerald just went through, and obviously they too were just a victim of the seas. They could have died in the same way as the people on the Fitzgerald did. But they got there, and immediately upon arriving safely, the Coast Guard asked Cooper, "Would you be willing to go back out into the storm and look for the Fitzgerald. Having arrived there with his crew, by the skin of their teeth, surviving this storm, now they're asked, we don't know where the Fitzgerald is. Will you go back out and look? Will you risk your life to go find it? Even though the situation was, nearly hopeless, even though there wasn't really much they could do anyway if they found the ship in the middle of the storm, will you go? And Cooper said it was the hardest decision I ever had to make, but I said yes. And so Cooper and one other ship went out to look for the Fitzgerald, even though it was on the bottom of the lake by then. What compels a man to do that? What compels a human being to say, after arriving safely through this horrible storm, I'm willing to risk my life and the life of my crew to go back out and look? Now, the first word that comes to you is probably the word love. And I'm not saying that's the wrong answer, but, and I'm not saying that the word love isn't going to come up in the sermon, because it is. But it's a surprise word that compelled him to do that. And it's the word friend. Friend is the word that we're going to talk about today. And friend is a form of love. This is what Jesus says in John chapter 15, the text we're looking at today, if you want to turn there. He says, greater love has no one than this. So the greatest form of love is this thing called friendship, sacrificial friendship, laying down your life for a friend. So there you have the whole sermon in the first 3 minutes. You don't have to listen to the rest, but I think there's some really important stuff to explore here if you want to take the ride with me. John 15, the text we are reading today, about the Father loving Jesus and then Jesus loving his disciples. What does it look like to abide in the love of Jesus? In verse 10 he says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These are the things I have spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. And then he gives this commandment. Here's my commandment to everyone, he says, that you love one another just as I have loved you. And then the verse. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I don't call you slaves or servants anymore, but I'm calling you friends. Okay? And he goes on from there. Now, I remember reading this the first 100 times I came to this text. And I was like, man, you're anticipating a really powerful word here, right? No longer do I call you servants, but I call you what? This is going to be an awesome word. Whatever Jesus is about to call his disciples, it's got to be the greatest, most powerful, greatest honor, whatever this title or status he's going to give them. And then he says, friends. Friend, I mean, that's a good word, but what are we doing? Is this like recess in 4th grade when we're just talking about friends? Friends isn't such a powerful word in our culture. That's what you have, in elementary school or something, and it's a big deal then. But friend, isn't that kind of a weak word? Isn't there a better word that Jesus could have used to describe his status with his disciples? That was my initial response to the text. Like, friend, it's kind of a weak word. But researching it, you've come to find out that friendship was a massive word, a hugely, deeply important word in Jesus' context. And on either side of Jesus, hundreds of years, on either side. You can go from Aristotle to Augustine. They are all talking about friendship. Friendship was hugely important in Greco-Roman culture. And like I said, Aristotle talked about it, and he talked about, I think he had 3 different tiers of friendship. The highest and the greatest and most important one of which was a friendship of virtue. A friendship of virtue is the highest state you can achieve as a human, the highest state of relationship. Friendship wasn't a weak word for kids at recess in 3rd grade. Friendship was the goal of an adult, human, mature existence in society. Friendship was the pinnacle of what you could be, especially this friendship of virtue as Aristotle talked about it. He talked about a friend, a true friend, being a second self. That's how close of a friend is this friendship of virtue. And this friendship exists for the goodness of the other. When I love myself, I'm loving my friend. When I love my friend, I'm loving myself. My goal is the goodness of this other person, the character and the development and the virtue of this other person. And we do that through various ways, one of which is truth-telling. That's why Jesus is saying, a servant doesn't know about its master's business. You're not in the know. But then the Gospel of John is about Jesus revealing truth to them, telling them truth about God, truth about reality, truth about themselves, truth telling. This is friendship. And there's pain involved too. I will tell the truth to Will, and he will tell the truth to me, even if it hurts one of us. Because Will wants me to be a better person. And so he'll tell me some things I don't want to hear. The opposite and counterpart to friendship in the ancient world talked about equally as much, if not more, it was flattery. Flattery was the evil twin of friendship. And flattery is the opposite. Flattery is self-centered. It's deceptive. We all know and understand what flattery is. But the goal is personal gain, telling someone what they want to hear, who cares if it's true or not, so that you can have personal gain. And there's a massive amount of literature about flattery in the Greco-Roman culture. And these 2 things, friendship and flattery, are at odds with each other. And that was just the cultural context and discussion. Everyone talked about it. And so Jesus begins to talk about it. And so flattery will never tell you the truth. But a friend will always tell you the truth because their goal is for you to become a better person, for your character, your virtue to grow and mature, for you to be a better person. I had a personal experience with that some years back. If you've been at our church for a while, you know that there was a period of time where I gained a significant amount of weight, where I gained like 60 pounds in 1 year and 100 pounds in 3 years, okay? Nobody ever said anything to me about that, very few. And, every summer we would go back and return to camp, the camp that we serve at. And we see these people once a year. So you see the changes in people pretty starkly after having not seen them for a year. And so I'm going in. I'm up a few pounds all the time, And there's a lot of people that would just say, hey, great to see you. How you doing? You're looking good. Those kind of things that we say to each other. And that's kind of our rules, our social convention, right? You don't talk about people's weight. Except for my friend named Jacob. Jacob doesn't care about those rules. And Jacob will say whatever he wants to. And of all the people, he was the only one that would come up to me, give me a hug, and say, hey, putting on some weight there, huh? What are you doing for exercise? What are you doing for workout? How much do you weigh right now? Now, most people say, oh, that's incredibly rude. That's horrible. Why would you do that to someone? But I say to you, because I know him, that's called friendship. Jacob was being a friend to me. He was willing to say stuff to me, even though everyone else was afraid, oh, this might hurt. It might hurt your feelings, or it might be rude, or something like that. No. Jacob was being a friend. He cared about me enough to say, hey, man, what's going on? You're going up. Let's talk about it. That's truth-telling. Jacob's not a flatterer. He's a truth-teller to his friends. And I've always respected him for that. Always been thankful for him for that. And I hope he asks me about it again this year, because truth-telling. But there's a difference between what friendship was in Jesus' context and what he is saying here in John 15. One really important difference. Jesus says, you are, in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. Verse 15, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. There was one rule about friendship in the Greco-Roman culture that was important, and that is that friendship only exists between people of equal status in the culture. Masters and slaves are not friends. Teachers and students are not friends. They're not equal. This person and this person are not friends. They're not on the same status. And in this situation where, although Jesus is clearly the teacher, clearly the master, and these are the disciples and the servants, he says, I understand what you are, but I no longer refer to you as that. I'm calling you a friend. I am humbling myself and at the same time bringing you up and exalting you. And even though we occupy two different places, one greater than the other, I'm calling you friends. I want to have a relationship of virtuous friendship with you. And that's unheard of in that culture. But Jesus is doing it. He's saying it doesn't matter what status you occupy in your culture. Friendship is independent of that now. That you can have these intimate, close, trusting relationships even with the Master, Jesus. Or, as we find out, even with God the Father himself. So he's changing that rule, breaking that rule, making a new one. Anyone can be friends. And then he says also in the text just a little bit above that, greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. Jesus is offering his definition of the ultimate form of friendship. Aristotle's friendship of virtue. Here's Jesus' definition of the highest form of friendship. Friendship is a subcategory of love. And the greatest form of love is this sacrificial form of friendship. Greater love has no one than this, that you would take your ship back out of harbor and go out into the storm to search for the ship and that crew. It's entering the willingness to re-enter or enter for the first time the storms that other people are in the midst of, is what Jesus says is the greatest form of love, the greatest form of friendship. We've all been through the storm. Some of us barely making it through. And thank God, finally, we're safe in the harbor. And the last thing we want to do is risk anything else. But if we have a friend out there that's still in the storm, Jesus says, you know what the greatest form of love is? It's the kind of friendship that says, I'm willing to go back in there again. Even if there's nothing I can do to help, even if the situation seems hopeless, I'm willing to risk myself to enter into their storm, literal or metaphorical. Because that is the model I see in Jesus. And that, of course, is exactly what he lived out. Laying down his life. Entering into our storm of sin and violence and scapegoat and deceit, becoming a victim of that for us. This is what Jesus calls friendship. And of course, we're in a church body. We have friends here in this room. And from time to time, different ones of us are in the midst of a storm. And from time to time, some of us are in a better place. And from time to time, we have these choices to make. I know that person's going through something. Do I just sit here in the harbor and be safe on the shores? Or am I willing to get out there as a friend? To enter into someone else's storm? And maybe that's just trying to be there for them, listen to them. Maybe that's truth-telling. Entering into someone's storm and telling them the truth because you care about them. You want them to be a better person. It takes many different forms. But it's something that's active and it's something that's sacrificial. It costs you something to do that. You're risking something to be a friend. And Jesus says, let me show you how to do it. And he goes to the cross and he risks everything. He says, this is what love looks like. This is what friendship looks like. Close today by quoting the great famous song by Gordon Lightfoot about the Fitzgerald. And probably one of the most popular lines, if not the most, is the line from the song. He says, does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Remember that line? Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Where does the love of God go when someone's in the midst of the storm? We already know the answer. The love of God goes into the storm, just like Captain Cooper, just like Jesus. And please, God, may we be courageous enough to do the same for one another, our friends. Let's stand and sing.
Please join me in singing, Bind Us Together, Bind Us Together. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together. Bind us together in love. There is only one God. There is only one King. And there is only one body. That is why we can sing. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together. Cords that cannot be broken.